If you are like me, you are struggling over the chaos and disgrace that occurred on the floor of the House of Representatives last week.
A speaker has not been elected.
So there's a few things I want to make clear here. First, there are some people saying, oh, this is democracy at work. And let me tell you, if they're telling you that, one of two things is true. Either A, they're lying to you, or B, they just don't know what democracy is. And here's why. Democracy is about discussion and debate, but it's discussion and debate about policy choices, about issues, about ideas, about the future direction of a country or a city or a state or a county. And that is just not what we saw last week on the floor of the House of Representatives. In fact, what we saw in the House was much closer to the kind of childish, immature, ineffectual bullying and fighting that frankly you might imagine middle schoolers playing out on a playground. When a member of the House of Representatives has to be physically restrained from hitting another member, that, my friends, is not democracy. And here's the other insight that's not an insight. What we saw last week was not negotiation working. As a negotiation scholar, as a negotiation coach, it was excruciating to watch. I'm going to use that shameful debacle, one that took 15 votes, an entire week to elect a Speaker of the House, and I'm going to try to extract some key negotiation lessons from it. I'm hoping that these lessons will maybe be useful to Speaker McCarthy if he's watching, but hopefully for others who want to become a more effective negotiator. If you stay to the end, I'm also going to offer some key advice on how to deal with holdouts and spoilers in negotiation. Let's go. Okay, so my first important lesson here really doesn't start last week, but it starts at the beginning of any kind of an interaction with someone on the other side of a negotiation. And it's this. Negotiation is so much more than just the transaction at hand. Negotiation is about reputation and relationships. And part of the reason we found ourselves as a nation, and specifically Speaker McCarthy found himself where he was last year, because during his years in Congress, McCarthy has developed not a relationship for trustworthiness, for respectfulness, for working through hard issues with the other side. Instead, he has developed a reputation for being dismissive, for constantly changing his views, and for being untrustworthy. A really key lesson in negotiation is don't be wholly trusting, but be wholly trustworthy. That means treating everyone with dignity and respect, saying what you mean and meaning what you say, having values that are discernible and understandable. Over many years in the Congress, what Speaker McCarthy sent as a message was that he was actually without values besides his own self-interest. Coming into this negotiation, he was working at a serious disadvantage. And this disadvantage was not just with the right wing of his party, but it was actually with the opposing party. And that makes negotiation really complex. So why do reputation and relationship matter? Well, it's because of something else that's really important, especially in multi-party negotiation, which is understanding what you need to get to win, understanding the decision rule. And in the House of Representatives, in order to be elected to the Speaker chair, you have to have a majority of the members voting. And so in this case, at least at the beginning, there were 434 representatives present, meaning that McCarthy had to get 218 votes to win. Now, McCarthy went into this knowing that he did not have enough votes to win, and that he would have to form some kind of a coalition. Now, there were two possible coalitional partners here. One was the far right wing of his party, called the Freedom Caucus. And of course, the other was perhaps a small number of Democrats who perhaps could have been willing to support him under the right circumstances for the good of the country and the good of the institution. Now, what does all of this have to do with reputation? Well, again, given the way McCarthy had treated Democrats for so many years, it was simply outside the bounds of possibility that he could ever win enough respect or support with even a few Democrats to become a possible coalitional partner. Had his relationship been a good one, do I think having some Democrats vote for him as Speaker was very likely? Absolutely not. Do I think it might have been possible? Absolutely. And the reason why is that there is a second important lesson here, which is in negotiation, at times, the enemy of your enemy is your friend. And it was very possible that under the right circumstances, a few Democrats, perhaps even with the permission of Hakeem Jeffries, might have been peeled off to elect McCarthy as Speaker for the good of the institution, the good of the American people, the good of legislation, the good of the Biden administration, for a whole bunch of reasons. But given McCarthy's reputation, that possibility was gone. And this leads to a third really important lesson in negotiation, which is that if you frame the negotiation as zero-sum with winners and losers, then it becomes zero-sum. But in fact, this negotiation did not have to be zero-sum. Now, you might be thinking, well, how is that possible? I mean, either Hakeem Jeffries or McCarthy or somebody else would need to be the speaker, and then other people wouldn't be the speaker. And that's true. But in this case, there are all sorts of value-creating possibilities that, again, could have been done with a different coalitional partner. Well, what would that look like? Well, just imagine this. Imagine if McCarthy would have gone to the Democrats and said, I will give you a few committee chairs, or on a few key committees, I will give you equal representation. Those things might very well have been yesable propositions for the Democrats. Or maybe saying, I'll hold off from what we know to be completely specious investigations of, for example, Hunter Biden's laptop. Now, again, to the degree you're saying, oh my gosh, Bob Bordone, you are so clueless, I want to acknowledge that the reason why we can't do this is because of this problem that I've been talking about on this channel, which is political polarization. Because in our history, we have had times when there have been unlikely coalitions across party lines to do things for the good of the country, the people, the institution, the future. But if we think a negotiation is zero-sum, we won't do that. If we've blown our reputation so that we've made some coalitional partners impossible, we can't do that. And so that leads to my third really important lesson here, which is that really good negotiators have to consider their broad set of interests and then communicate them really clearly. You know, Speaker McCarthy claims to have both a legislative and an investigatory agenda. But actually, what he failed to do in his negotiations here was really communicate that. In fact, one thing and one thing alone got communicated, which is that what was most important to him at any cost was to be elected Speaker of the House. And as a negotiator, once you put forward the most important, and the only thing you care about, it makes it really easy for somebody who would be a holdout or a spoiler to use that to their advantage. But in fact, if McCarthy had a broad set of interests that of course included him being Speaker, but that wasn't the only one, there was a way where some trades that made sense, that were value creating, that were in the interest of his legislative and frankly maybe his investigatory agenda, could have been reached. So this leads to the last area I want to talk about, which is how do you handle spoilers? Right? Because one thing that was evident in this negotiation is that members of the Freedom Caucus were acting as holdouts or spoilers. Now, there's a lot that can be said about spoilers in negotiation. So I'm going to keep this short, but want to say a few important pieces. The first is it's important to identify among three categories a spoiler. One is called a limited spoiler. So a limited spoiler is somebody who says something like this: if I'm not chair of the Judiciary Committee, I will not vote for you. So it's somebody who's asking for a very specific thing, and if they get that thing, they will come on board. The second is what's called a greedy spoiler. So a greedy spoiler is someone who will say, I'd really like to have X. In fact, I need X. And as soon as they get X, they're like, and also Y. And as soon as they get Y, they're like, oh, and also Z, right? They keep on asking for more until it's very clear that they can get no more concessions. And the last category is someone who's called a total spoiler. So a total spoiler is basically somebody who says, I will blow this bus up. Now, truth of the matter is that sometimes people who appear to be total spoilers are actually greedy spoilers. And in this case, that was very much the case with at least some of the most extreme members of the House Freedom Caucus, particular folks led by Matt Gaetz. And so what needed to happen much sooner, and what a really good negotiator would have done, is signaled that we are done. There will be no more concessions. You can either get on board, but the train is moving out of the station. And that is something that McCarthy never really did. Or if he did, he certainly didn't do it publicly. And so, in fact, after Gates ultimately voted president in the 15th vote, he was interviewed and asked, why did he, for 14 votes, not do this? And on the 15th vote, he votes present. And he said, quote, I ran out of things I could even imagine asking for. So in other words, McCarthy here failed to really handle the greedy spoiler problem. And the result here is that in many respects, he has a Pyrrhic victory. Yes, he is a Speaker of the House, but it will be nearly impossible for him to govern. He did not earn the goodwill of the Freedom Caucus at the end of the day. He did not win the goodwill of holdouts. He still does not have the goodwill of the Democrats. In fact, he taught holdouts and everyone a really good lesson. He thinks the lesson that was taught was, I will never give up. But I think the actual lesson that was learned, dig in, never surrender until you get every last thing. So this was a real sad example to me of negotiation. It was a really sad day for democracy, made even sadder by the fact that it happened 2 years to the day after the January 6th riots. But hopefully there are some lessons that all of us can take out of it. First, really good negotiators always cultivate their reputation and relationships. That doesn't mean being soft on issues. In fact, you could be really tough on a problem, really firm with your values and principles. But it does mean being soft on people. It means establishing a reputation for being trustworthy, reasonable, and constructive. Second, whenever you can, search out the right coalitional partners. Remember, the enemy of your enemy can be your friend. Third, even negotiations that look zero-sum in nature aren't necessarily so. You can be creative and find mutual gains. Fourth, when dealing with holdouts or spoilers, diagnose the kind of spoiler or holdout that you're dealing with and then apply an appropriate strategy. So if the speaker battle last week has taught us anything, it's that the problem of polarization in this country is making good governance and decency harder and harder. So stay tuned and watch this next video, which is how does political polarization lead to gridlock in Congress? Also, I'd be tremendously grateful if you would like this video, ring the bell so you'll get notified when I drop new videos, and of course, if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Okay, you know you want to keep learning about political polarization. Keep watching. Click, click, click.